Roy, welcome to the show. It's so nice to see you.
It's so great to catch up and so nice to see you too.
A little bit of background info. Roy actually used to be my boss back in the day at an ad agency, and that's how we met. He was a creative director, and I was freelancing for his digital department that he started. And I kept in touch with Roy, and I was like, Roy, what are you up to? And he was like, oh, no biggie, just working on this big film with Margaret Cho and Arden Cho. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I started watching K-pop Demon Hunters. And then my kids obviously started watching Demon Hunters. And of course, I love Margaret Cho. And I love Roy because Roy's amazing. And I was like, please come on my show. And you're here.
Well, I'm honored. Oh my goodness, you're making me blush there.
um, I'll jump into it. What was your dream growing up as a kid?
As a kid, especially with a kid with ADHD, I had a lot of dreams. The thought of doing something in entertainment had always been in the back of my head. Everyone just expected the Asian kids to go into the sciences, and then I went to art school, and from there went to New York and ended up putting that off to the side. Then went into advertising. Had dreams there, becoming a creative director, which I did become. At the end of the day, I guess never stopped dreaming.
What is the first movie that you saw that made you realize you wanted to make films? Or like what was the first creative part that set you off on this path?
Wow. I as a kid, one of the um, films that always stuck in back in my head was The Goonies. And it was interesting because I never really thought, why did The Goonies appeal to me? And I was at South by Southwest when Steven Spielberg was talking, and he was talking about how The Goonies came about with him and his friends, how he always considered himself an outsider. And interestingly enough, I will say my foray into film and even as a writer, a storyteller, had a lot to do with Steven Spielberg himself. And not in the way that people would imagine, but I was watching a interview with Steven Spielberg online, and he was discussing how he discovered he was dyslexic in his 50s, and this is after he wrote The Goonies, after he directed all of these films, and he talked about Goonies, how he didn't do well in school, how he struggled, and he felt like an outsider. And thinking about that and thinking about what he accomplished was actually what inspired me to kind of go forward and start writing screenplays.
How did you come around to the idea of cheap AF and how did you sit down and did it and like I'm gonna start with how did you come around with the idea for it because it's a brilliant idea.
The idea with Cheap AF, it actually had a very different title at first. There's a truism, and I wanted to speak from an immigrant, a child of an immigrant background, and what ends up happening, regardless of what race you are, if your parents came from another country, moved here to try to build a better life, they tend to be very cheap because they were always trying to save for a better day. They had to save a lot just to get here. And when someone goes through that pattern, oftentimes it stays with them through life. And so the original title was actually Cheap Ass Asian. And because yes, we changed the name to Cheap AF because, frankly, some people weren't necessarily understanding that where the cheap ass Asian came from, that meant to be kind of a sign of pride, right? And so the truism, so it basically combined a lot of somewhat embarrassing family stories. But then I started asking my friends who are also children of immigrants about their stories, and we all related. Whether my friend who was Polish, my friend who was Haitian, we had very similar stories about like what our parents did. And so combining all of that, and I just thought it was, for those who don't know, the story is about a woman played by Arden Cho who wants to be the social media star of saving money. And she enters a best wedding on a budget social media competition, only for her best friend, who used to be her childhood bully, to join in. And then their fiancés, who are dead broke, conspired with each other to try to get the women to compete because they wanted the cheapest wedding possible. And I just thought that with all of these other stories, that particularly these wedding competition rom-coms, is all about these grand weddings, that it would be really funny if two women are trying to compete and trying to have the cheapest wedding.
It's so
So
funny. I can't wait to see it. I think it's hilarious. And I think if you've ever gone through doing a wedding, you know how expensive it is. I don't know if I told you, but did you know that I was an immigrant? Do you know that? Did I ever
Yes.
tell you
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm like, I get the whole immigrant experience. I mean, like that's like my daily existence still with my own parents.
And that's, as a storyteller, one of the most important things that for anyone who's looking to do this, one of the most important things that you can think about is being empathetic. It's not about just your story, is how do other people relate? Right. And,
Yes.
as I thought about this, and even though the characters are, child of Chinese immigrants, the fact that as I told the story, so many people told me how they related to it. I had people who were Scottish tell me about their Scottish fathers that related to the story, to someone from the Asian to, Haitian, to everyone. And so that's the power of storytelling, right? As we took a look at these stories, and that's where, even something like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, why did that become such a big hit? So many people, besides, you don't have to be Greek to appreciate the story of culture clashes, of trying to fit in. And in many ways, that was also what I was trying to build upon.
Obviously you included some personal stories, I take it.
Yes.
Do you mind giving us a preview? Like, can you share one story that made it? Or like, or you know what? If you want to share some that didn't make it, that might actually even be more interesting. Or a mix, whatever you want to do.
Let's see, a story that didn't make it well, or a story that did make it. I'll just give you one. So there is a image in the beginning where, for Christmas time, where the dad created a Christmas tree made out of green painter's tape on the wall, and then just turns around and said, "Close enough." And that was honestly, the cast was great. We had Arden Cho, Margaret Cho, Catherine McNamara, Alberto Rossendi, Tuan Lee, Josh Plasse, and so many of them related to different parts of the story, right? And Margaret, when I first met Margaret Cho, who was absolutely wonderful in the film, she immediately related to so much what I was saying. And one of the reasons why she wanted to be part of the project was she said that no one ever dealt with this aspect of growing up as an immigrant or an immigrant's child.
I'm just laughing because like something happened in my household today, and I was like, this can only happen in an immigrant household because I think immigrant households tend to be multi-generational, where I think
Yes.
American households, there's something called boundaries. I'm sorry, I could talk about boundaries, these American boundaries. I have a really hard time with boundaries because they don't exist in my house.
you know and something else that happens is, like, part of it is also the language barrier of when someone translates something and English is not the first language, they speak and it sounds so blunt, right?
It
Like,
does,
you
it
real
does, it does.
and, and when someone says something and it's just like, wait, did they just say that? But in the native language, it doesn't sound that way.
Or it's just the way that you communicate because it's just a different culture. Like, oh my God, it's hilarity. It's hilarity all the time. It's hilarity all the time. And I can't wait to see Margaret Cho as a mom because I think, like I'm Gen X, so I'm like, go Margaret Cho. I grew up on her show. I
Yeah.
I grew up watching. She was the first Asian on TV. So, and she's LGBTQ. So I was like, this is amazing because there's somebody that like represents our generation, our audience. But then there's also, um, this new part with K-pop just exploding everywhere. So you have like a new generation coming together, and it's just absolutely, absolutely, absolutely incredible
Yeah.
because
I,
Arden Cho is like amazing, and I'm like, this is just amazing that we have like two amazing people coming together with a whole entire cast, and it's just
yeah.
like it's a mashup. I love it.
I feel honored that wanted to work with Margaret Cho for many years. Like you said, she was the first Asian that I saw on TV having her sitcom, even though the sitcom wasn't what she ultimately was hoping for, but she was groundbreaking. And, Arden was always top choice for the role. I read about the different things that she said, that struggles and her childhood, my childhood, were somewhat similar in some regards. And so that's where, I knew that she would relate to the story. And as much as, the groundwork of it is a wedding competition and the wedding, a rom-com. And, there's the aspect of saving money, but ultimately it's also a story that deals with the immigrant experience, trying to fit in. What is the effect of when you don't feel like you fit in, and childhood bullying. And these were aspects that I knew that Arden would relate to, and she did, and that's why, I felt like I had the perfect cast for this film. And ultimately, I think a lot of people can relate to just the aspect of not fitting in, and whether you're an immigrant or not. And that's where the universal themes of how we relate as a storyteller comes in.
I think so, and, I started watching K-pop Demon Hunters because I've got a 5-year-old and I've got a 2.5-year-old, and they are both singing the songs.
Yes.
And as we sing the songs, they're so passionate about it, and I started singing the songs, and I started getting emotional because I was like, "Oh my gosh, I relate to this as an immigrant."
Yes. Exactly.
Like Golden has been an anthem, and every song, every song has been about a really complicated human experience put into an animation form. And it's just
Exactly.
been like I kind of have to say I kind of tear up a little bit. But I want to ask if any personal stories from Arden or Margaret made it into the film as well, if they shared their stories like, "Oh my god, this happened."
You know, uh, oh, that is a good question. Um, Both of them added so much to the role. And, as a director and as a writer, it is important that you write something, but it's from your art viewpoint. But when you work with artists like them, you kind of collaborate. And so they brought a lot about, their viewpoints into it so that it kind of it merged a little bit of my experience with their experience. So throughout the whole film, it was very much a collaborative effort, right? And so we related to certain things like, part of the film is also delving into kind of an exaggerated stereotypes of certain things, right? Like, Asians, families, stressing education. And so, one of the scenes where, if I can say, like, Margaret absolutely killed it, was a young Carol, the main character, comes home with A minus on her math test, and Margaret Cho starts falling to the ground, wailing to God, pulling her hair, going, "Why me? Why me?" and so so there are little aspects that many of us like related to, and she just you give them a sense of what you're looking for. They bring their own little takes into it, the little nuances, and that's what makes filmmaking fun.
Would you say it was like a little bit of improv and a bit more directing, or was it kind of like a little bit more like stay towards the script and like how is your directing style?
My directing style is the script is just the foundation, right? You want to make sure you get enough coverage for what your initial intent, but you also want to give your actors some room to play around with. What else did they see that you didn't see? I think it was Scorsese that said that your first take, don't give your actors any direction. See how they interpret it, because you'll never get that brand new perspective ever again. If they have any idea of what you're planning to do, they may take it, you may not get that. But that being said, yeah, absolutely. There were parts of the film that, frankly, one of the talents saw something that I didn't see, or they saw a area for additional comedy that they could add on to, and those are the magical moments where it's something that you just didn't expect, right? And as a director, you want to be open to those, and you want to be able to capture them when you can.
Right. I am just I'm just so excited to see you flourish. because I've seen you as a creative director and I worked for you, and it's just so wonderful to see you bringing life into Seattle again because Seattle has a really big scene, and you're also doing a feature film there. And I think the last feature film that was shot, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean like Twilight is like a little bit in Canada. It's been kind of like nearby over there, but then you have
Mm.
Seattle and you've got like Sleepless in Seattle. So it's
Yeah,
like, is this like the last film since Sleepless in Seattle? I don't know. I haven't like done the research on it,
there
but
have been other films. The difference with my film is that this is homegrown too. Like, so I live in Seattle. I brought it in. I was, it was a major picture that was from a Seattle director. We hired mostly a Washington crew. About over, I think over 95% were Washington, and there have been other productions from Paramount that moved up, but but not that's something that started here. And you speak of Super Seattle, like, yeah, there used to be a huge film industry here, and everything from Twin Peaks. And as an actor, when I moved here, I started acting. Like, I met the casting directors; they're still around, all around here. In fact, one of my casting directors that did the casting locally was the casting directors of Twin Peaks,
oh, Twin
and
Peaks, that's
y-
amazing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so it's it's exciting to start bringing up. Washington is starting to has revamped their incentive. Traditionally, if you look at any economic impact of a film incentive, a tax incentive for entertainment, always has an outsized return in terms of additional revenues and businesses that it interacts with it. And I'm also proud to say that my production gave a lot of people locally, because there isn't as much production here as LA, obviously. But a lot of people were able to join the unions because of my production. They got their hours in union production, and now they're part of a official crew in the area, so that when other people look at this area, they can see that we have the talent.
That's amazing. And I think when people think of movies, they think of movie stars, they think of, the the cameraman, the directors, but a film set is so much more. It's craft services. It is hair and makeup, who are like the huge part of the movie. You have set designers, you have costume designers, and films make economies. I was just living in
Yes.
Atlanta, and since Hollywood kind of like shut down, I was in Atlanta for 3 years due to all the work there. And now that work left out in Atlanta, and there's so many people there that are so talented. There's so many studios that are wanting to work. One studio was like, "Come film your show here. We'll like film for like 1 million." And usually you have to spend like 7 or 8 million at least to film something. But they were desperate. So I think it's really important that we support local economies right now across the country, especially in Seattle, and we give people more chances to tell their stories because people need stories right now. There are not that many stories out in the world.
And I will say this for to any budding and emerging filmmaker: if you're looking for your first project, oftentimes it's great to look at one of the secondary markets, the emerging markets, because frankly, the film commissioners in those markets will oftentimes much more reachable. They're much more accommodating. They really want to start bringing in productions that, for like, I can't think of any other states that's like Washington, where you can literally pick up the phone and you dial them. You will get a answer from the people at the top, like, and they will talk to you and they will answer your questions. That's frankly kind of unheard of. They've worked really hard to make things simple. The reimbursement process is great. One thing about Washington, where the reasons why I chose it too, is that they're really trying to support the underrepresented voices as well. So if you have a story like mine that deals with the underrepresented voice of, like, there's the Asian and immigrants, they give you an enhanced incentive. You can get an up to an additional 10% in terms of in-state spend back, or if you shoot in a rural area. And so these are great ways for the emerging filmmakers to really to kind of take advantage, because when you're in a larger market like Atlanta or LA, it's very hard for you to even get the attention of the film commissioners to try to get your project off the ground.
Well, that's so true. And there's so many incentives. And I was going to ask you, how did you get your film off the ground? I wasn't going to ask you this question before because it didn't even occur to me, but this is your first feature film and you landed two major stars. Like you literally landed Arden, who's like the biggest star right now, and Margaret Cho, who is a huge, huge, amazing star. Not to mention the whole entire cast. There is like at least 10
Yeah.
people, and my brain cannot handle anything because I've got two kids. So the only thing I can remember is your name and two other people's names for now. That is my bandwidth. That's
Yeah.
all I can do.
The one thing I will say, my background is a combination of things. I was a photography major, so I had the visuals as a creative director, as the marketing. I now run my own registered investment advisory firm. So there's the finance, and film has really allowed me to combine all of those different aspects. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is remember that this is a business, and as much as we love telling stories, but there's think about it, and as when you're thinking about the stories to tell, this is where the empathy comes in. Does your story relate to other people? How does it relate to other people? How do you bring that in? Then you have a market, right? And then in terms of building up your team, it's really important to understand all of the business aspects. And if you're not the right one, make sure you have the partners that do, because oftentimes, I've talked to other teams, and sometimes I worry that their focus is too much on the creative and not on the business. That if something goes wrong, what happens if you go over budget? Have you planned the contingencies so that you don't simply stop shooting? Because if you stop shooting, can't finish your project, then what? Right? And these are things that can happen quite a lot to first time directors. So, really making sure that your financial plan makes sense. Too many filmmakers can sometimes sacrifice everything for the first project, but when they do, their project probably, if it's never profitable, if you can't return your investors money, if there's no shot of that, then your second project is probably going to be dead in the water, because who would want to work with you?
Right, right. I think that's so important. And I think, have you learned any lessons from putting together a business plan that you want to share when it comes to filmmaking? Like something that's like a pitfall that most people fall into that you might have experience with because you kind of have like this experience of being a financial planner and a creative director and a dev, which, most people are just creatives.
And this is where, as a creative director, I always said that, uh, you know, there's a lot of people in the corporate world that you suddenly go from a worker to a manager, and there isn't like a lot of teaching about what being a manager is, right? And to me, the best creative directors in advertising, it's not about being a creative director. It's about how do you enhance someone else's idea, as well as how do you build a proper team. Not everyone is good at everything. So you need to have people and know people's strengths, people's weaknesses, as well as your own, and make it so that it's very cohesive and holistic, right? Same thing is with filmmaking. Absolutely same. It's as much as I can say, yes, I was the director, but it was a huge team effort. At the largest day, we had, I think, uh, like 87 people on set. 87. And there was a whole bunch of department heads. You have to be able to learn to work with others. It is building the right team, and people who concentrate too much on the creatives. I oftentimes see that they don't leave money for a line producer. They don't leave money for, the people who actually handles the back end. Like, is your paperwork in order? Can you actually, are you going to shoot the film and then can't submit to the incentive because you don't have your paperwork in order, right? So there's all these things, and there's all these things that are so necessary. And the most important thing I'd say, it's the same thing as running as a CEO, as a company. Know your strengths, know your weaknesses, build your team around you, and be thankful. Because at the end of the day, this is a tough industry. And, if it's your project and this is your passion project, just remember that it's your passion project. Other people may actually like it, but they're never going to like it as much as you. So if you're not easy and good to work with, they can just walk away.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think it's so true. I think, it's kind of like putting a band together. Like if you have a drummer, you might not necessarily have it be a singer or play on the guitar. I mean, it's good if everybody knows instruments. It's good if you've got Prince, but then if you have Prince, he's doing his own show.
Yeah.
I can talk about this forever, but I think that is so important. And I was going to ask you, what is the biggest lesson that you learned on this production? Something that you learned that you didn't know before, and now you know that that you were like, "Hey, now I know this, and now when I'm making my next feature, I'm gonna keep this in mind."
As much as I thought I was prepared, having another week of preparation would have been really helpful. There's a couple of key learnings, right? And again, I'll just re-emphasize making sure you have a great team. And part of the making sure you have a great team, this is a people industry, business. People work with people they know and they like, and you meet these people over time. I started this a couple years ago, wrote this a couple years ago, met a couple people. I'm really happy to say, like, my partners and producers who've worked on everything from things like Margin Call, All Is Lost, worked at major different studios as well as with the stars. They brought in a lot of the business, and I also knew for myself, I'm like, I was still learning this part of business as much as I was a creative director, as much as I understood running businesses, in some areas that I was like, I'm still learning. So I just became a sponge, right? And this is where, you put your ego aside, and there's a lot of people out there that was willing to help you if you're listening, and you're just good to work with, right? Seattle, the market is like, I thought was pretty friendly, but the previous production, which will remain unnamed, came from LA. That was a big project in this area, and they burned a whole bunch of people out. And so when I got to sets, I'm just waiting for people to come to me. And when they did, there was literally people with the fear of God in their eyes. They thought I was going to be screaming at them because they're so used to directors just screaming and trying to get what they wanted. And, I have a kind of a no assholes on set policy. And from that, I learned, I was like, wow, I think it would have been more important for me to be a little bit more proactive, just to meet everyone, put everyone at ease. And because you never know what someone's past background is. And I'd say that was one of the learning experiences. Like, all right, anytime I'm going to be on set, let me take the time to take that so they understand who I am. Like, if they had the bad experiences, I'm not going to be like that. And because I think that some people delayed coming to me because they're trying to figure out some things rather than coming to me with the problem, and me being able to say, yeah, let's just solve it together.
Yeah, I think it's about establishing trust and safety. And it's kind of like, I bring this back to the creative industry too. Entering an ad agency. I mean, God, I have so much PTSD from some agencies.
Yes.
Just because there's no trust, there's no communication, you don't feel like you can talk about things. You can bring things to a person, and like it's not a solution based thing. It's like a punishment based system.
Yes.
So I think it's so important to create safety for creatives to function, and it's a different conversation about um just straight up abuse sometimes. How do you create good work with nice people?
And for the most part, like any emerging filmmaker, it's your first project. Frankly, it's going to be relatively like on the lower end of the budget, even though this project was probably larger than most first time directors, right? But even with that, we have to remember that people work, why people want to work on projects is not always about the money. Like, with the talent, did they connect with the story? Do they want to be part of something? Is this something that they really want to do? And the crew that you developed, do they like the project? Do they like working on it? And people who are having fun, people who feel appreciated, will always work so much harder naturally. And that ultimately is the sign of a good creative director, is a good CEO. You inspire your crew to want to be there.
I like people who work for me kind of laugh because at the end of the day, kind of like touch base with people, and I'm like, thank you for coming in today and doing your job and doing an amazing job. But I think hearing thank you is so rare sometimes. And that basic, like, hey, I see you, you're cool. I saw the great job you did today. And like, I just want to thank you for it. Or like, you saved the day, and really highlighting people's successes and making them feel good and safe. And like, I don't know, maybe it's like me being a mom because people are always like, "You're such a mom." And I'm like, "I love it." I love to
Yeah,
make people feel good in the world that just like wants to like make you feel horrible
I
sometimes.
agree. I agree, and that's kind of that was my philosophy of business and in life in general. It's just there's no need for egos and just can't we all just like I hate to say can't we all get along, but but yeah, you just create an environment that people want to work, right? And this is, as you know, in advertising, and we because we both worked at the places where it was a just revolving door of people, right? Like the agency said no one wanted to work at. And I've been there and there's no ultimately there's no saving it. Always comes from the top if you set the right tone, and as a director, you're kind of like the CEO, you set the right tone for your production, everyone else, it trickles down immediately.
I agree. I agree. And I think, um, and I was gonna say, how do you stay creatively energized, right? Like, because there's so much, and I think sometimes being a creative, you have to be a sponge, right? But when you're in the middle of creating a project that can take months, like 5 months, 6 months, you're like in it, and it's hard to find inspiration because sometimes when you just want to break, you're like, I just want to go for a walk. I want to spend
Yeah.
time doing whatever I love. I don't like it's like working in a donut shop. You're like, I don't really want to eat a donut right now on my
Yeah.
day off. So how do you
Yeah. But
how do
I will,
you stay energized?
and here's where I'm just going to be very truthful and very honest. This of all of this kind of creative fields, like filmmaking is one of the toughest, right? And, in advertising, I remember as a creative director, and I can admit this now, I worked in advertising for 20 years. And, part of my strength was I felt like I could enhance other people's ideas. But do you know how many campaign ideas that I actually came up with that got approved by the client? Zero. And granted, I was on the digital side, so there's a lot of executional stuff like the of design that got through, but the big ideas, like I've had plenty of ideas that got presented to the client, but the client were somewhere else, right? And that's but that's also part of the process. You show them a variety of ideas, but I had this long advertising career, but I didn't actually get a lot of my ideas all the way through to completion. And filmmaking is this is an industry in which you hear like 100 no's, 200 no's before you can hear maybe or a yes. And so this, being able to understand that, first of all, this is very subjective. Like a lot of people are going to say, what is relatable to someone based on their experience can be very different than yours. And you have to just keep going because what drives you has to be something much deeper than trying to, quote unquote, trying to get success, trying to become famous. Those are bad reasons. Like if the reason for your storytelling isn't something much more core to who you are, you're going to have a big motivation problem when you just start constantly getting rejections. All the big directors, and I'm not going to mention some of the, like, but you'll know they get rejected all the time. They have ideas, they pitch things, and they can't get things through to the studios as well. So this industry is really, really tough. And so in terms of getting motivated, what is your reason for doing this? Like, are you the type, because it's very possible that you work for years and years and years. Like it took me, I wrote this thing 5 years ago, right? And this is the first thing that I wrote that got produced. I've had other things that got optioned, but there are people who literally work in this industry. I've met them at like Austin Film Festival. There's one writer that I met. She worked in the industry and has been making a living as a writer for 10 years, did not have a single credit to her name because everything she worked on got axed. That's tough, right? But after all of that, you know, you create your community. This is also, creative. Sometimes people think like they're just working in the vacuum, particularly the ones that are writers. Like if you don't have a community and you can't celebrate other people's win, you can't celebrate and get inspired. This is also, it's going to be very hard to keep moving forward too.
That's so true. Um, what would you say was what really helped you get your idea for Cheap AF through? What do you think? Like, do you, if you can share it, if you don't mind sharing it?
I I'll be perfectly honest about this is that I was showing the concept around and there was a lot of people that um looked at it and some people really liked it, but it just never went anywhere. Something is truly a passion, and this is where thinking about it from different aspects because I was already a producer trying to help other people along, and no one's going to like your project as much as you do. And so if something is truly a passion, then you have to be the driving force of moving it forward and building that team yourself. There's always, yes, there's a chance that you get a producer who really likes something who can spearhead it. But, the very first project for most directors is a passion project that they just they can't go on living without it being done.
I love it. I love it. It is. It has to be birth. Like you are the
Yeah.
vessel that has to
Mhm.
bring this thing into it, and there's no other way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's you will sacrifice a lot of things to move it forward, and it's that kind of passion that also makes great projects, right? Like finding the right partners, like the other producers that I work with, they really in tune with the project, and because of the universal themes, right, and certain things that everyone can relate to. And ultimately, you just have to do it. I mean, it sounds that sounds kind of cliche, but uh, but
It sounds iconic. I mean,
yeah,
just do it. It's
yeah.
iconic.
Oh, one thing I will say that sometimes because when we write these stories, they are very personal, right? And sometimes people get as a writer, you're putting a lot of yourself into something. And at the end of the day, there are certain things that you are pulling directly from your life, certain things that you are making up. And when someone reads it, you're not quite sure if someone will understand what is actually part of you versus what isn't, right? And sometimes certain writers, particularly when you're starting out, they get very shy about it. Right. And they hold back but the best writing is going to be when you put yourself in it, and it's going to be things that actually make you uncomfortable writing because it's about how you feel. Like when in the same way that ultimately the story is about a story of acceptance not fitting in. Me drawing upon my personal experiences, the things that are frankly like I didn't necessarily like to talk about. That's what made it real, and that's what ultimately made it relatable. And that's where a core of a good story starts from.
I think so. Pain is payment.
Yes, that's like comedy is trauma plus time.
Well, yes, yes, yes. Comedy is trauma. So much trauma. And I think when you're an immigrant, there's so much trauma. Oh my gosh, there's so much trauma. I mean, that's like a gold mine of trauma. I mean, I wrote actually like a book about my experience as a Russian immigrant. Because, I'm Russian, but I'm not because I grew up here. I'm American. But it's identity, right? It's who you are. And it's all these funny stories about trying to fit in and all of this, just existence. But I was gonna ask you, what is your dream as an adult now that you have grown up?
Where's my dream? Oh my goodness. I have a lot of dreams still, I guess. I ultimately, there's in the filmmaking side, there's a couple of the projects that I'm working on that really are so much me into them as well. And getting those things out. I'm also with my partners. We're starting a film fund so that we can bring more projects to Washington State, as well as the film fund would fund others. I'm working on a project about the internment camps, for example. That's been a passion project for of mine for 7 years that I hope to get off the ground. Really talking about like a dark history of American history to, as a producer, I'm also one that will get great joy when I can get some things off the ground for other first-time directors and first-time filmmakers and get their dreams out too. So I hope to keep making films, keep telling stories, and hopefully, as much as certain people had, like even Steven Spielberg telling his story, like what he was telling was was not necessarily about filmmaking. It inspired me. I'm hoping that hopefully people relate to what I'm saying and it inspires them.
Well, you've inspired me, at least. You've always inspired me, and I always remembered you as
Well,
like
thank
a
you.
cool boss to work for. Like I remember we did work. We had some really, really hard projects, but at the end I was like, "Oh, I like Roy."
Oh,
Because
thank
that's
you.
what you want to remember.
Oh,
It's like I
oh,
hope I wasn't a jerk. There was some,
no,
I
no,
think I
you
got
were
a, I
always
think I,
you were
there was a
always
night where,
totally pleasant. I mean, that's so sweet. Thank you so much.
you know,
Honestly, and I always say like this. What makes my day, what made my day as a creative director was also when I hear people like you'd say things like that they really appreciated, uh, working there and they felt appreciated in the same way that on this project, I appreciated like hearing from the crew how much fun they had, how they've been able to join the union, to even the people who read it, how much they related to it and they appreciated, how the story. So those things are just as important to me. So, and ultimately, I know other people feeling appreciated as well as me feeling appreciated that like people actually related to the story, because at the end of the day, it is a big risk when you write something because you start showing around. You don't know if people will love it, hate it, will not get it at all. And you put yourself out there. So, so at the end, when this is released, I hope everyone enjoys it.
oh, I forgot to ask you, when is this going to be released? That was one of my questions.
We're in post production right now, so we're hoping for probably maybe early next year or something. So we will see. The post production process takes quite some time, much longer than the actual shooting time. So
That's awesome. That's so exciting. I can't wait. Well, let me know and I'm going to share it with my audience. And we're all going to, like, maybe we'll have a party. We will have a viewing party. Wouldn't that be fun? That would be so much
that
fun.
would
Like
be
an
a lot of
online
fun.
viewing party.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be great. Okay, I'm going to shut down. Roy,
Okay.
thank you so much for
No,
having you
thank
on the
you.
show. You're amazing.